So, the story goes like this. 3 years ago, I began a blog in which my primary subjects would be Thomas the Tank Engine Friends and My Little Pony Friendship is Magic. In that time, my style of critiquing has evolved, but for the most part, I've only done written reviews. Until now, that is. Yes, my friends, 3 years after the Railfan Brony blog began, I, Zack Wanzer, have finally taken to doing video reviews. So, what type of reviews will I be doing? Well, there's common subjects like looking back on older episodes, top 10, comparing and contrasting two or more episodes, etc. Of course, there'll be two common review styles for my channel. Regular Railfan Brony reviews and Emotions Corner. What is this Emotions Corner thing, I hear you ask? Well, this is a type of review in style of Inside Out where a minimum of 2 people and a maximum of 5 discuss a group of episodes or a film, and each person is represented through one of the 5 emotions: joy, anger, fear, sadness, and disgust, the latter of whom are represented as. There are going to be some things people won't agree with, and that shouldn't be a problem. It allows their fellow reviewers to be more analytical and nitty-gritty with each other rather than just tearing each other people's opinions to shreds on a weekly basis. Look at the visual style you've seen thus far. I'm sure there's going to be a fair number of you complaining that I'm ripping off Oliver 11 GWR and Chris Bocher's Season 20 reviews and other critiques style of visual reviewing in my approach. Let me assure you that nothing is original these days, even the most uniquely told story. Sometimes a visual review works best because it makes listening to others' opinions engaging, constructive, and most importantly, fun. Why shouldn't we try what others are doing? You never know if it'll work or not, even if it doesn't stop people tearing one another's opinions to shreds, but I digress. I won't be shying away from controversial subjects, but if the subject involves politics, then I'm not going to bother. At least until 2021 or 25. Regardless of what viewpoints I have that differ from yours, I do hope to get the people talking and bring us something new to each and every table possible. Of course, if someone takes offense to my views, I apologize beforehand and don't mean offense upon anyone. We'll see over time if people want more video reviews from me. So, here I am, Zack Wanzer, doing a video review channel focusing on trains and ponies. What could possibly go wrong? But for now, get some snacks and a drink, and welcome to the first edition of the Emotions Corner. As usual, we open with a song. Our first topic for the Emotions Corner is about the latest installment to Thomas's 20th season, Extraordinary Engines. If you'd like to know my thoughts on the other 22 episodes from said season, you can click the links below in the video description. All I can say is that up to right now, despite a couple of duds, this season has been a blast. Here, I'm not tackling the final 6 episodes alone. Now, this is a collaborative review with my good friend and occasional fan and reaction contributor to my MLP reviews, Mike Nicholson, or Shiny Luna Productions on YouTube, represented as Joy.
Hey Zach.
Hey Mike, thanks for joining me on this review.
No problem, man. You ready to get this underway?
Sure am, so why don't you tell everyone watching how this will go?
Sure. Basically, one of us, either Zach or myself, will talk about the episodes. Then each of us will give our thoughts and opinions on it, and give our personal scores on each.
Please keep in mind that each of us will have differing opinions on some of the episodes we're reviewing. So once we each give our personal scores, we'll give a combined score which will average as the final score.
Also note that these are our personal opinions. You're guaranteed to disagree with us at least once in this review, and if that's the case, that's fine. I mean, we disagree with each other on some things.
Something I think is worth knowing is that we wrote up this review before the official DVD listing was revealed, and of course, the episodes will be done out of order. So bear with us on that. If you'd like to hear our thoughts on a particular episode, you can skip to a time frame, again as seen in the description below. That being said,
let's do this!
Engine of the future.
Okay, when this episode and the following came out on YouTube following its airing in Japan, I signed up against both episodes and the character featuring them by quite a bit. I'm gonna be honest from the get-go when I say that the pressure's on. A rail zeppelin called Hugo arrives at the island of Sodor. At first, the engines are impressed, but when Steven comments about being replaced, intrigue turns into fear and the engines become hostile toward Hugo, thinking his design will replace theirs. But in the end, they realize the error of their ways and accept him as really useful. Well, isn't that inspiring?
Okay, let me start off by talking about the episode itself. I like the concept of bringing modernity into Sodor, such as bringing a rail zeppelin in as a visitor, supposedly. I don't hate the episode itself, but I will say one thing I disliked about it. The Steam Team's initial reaction to him. This is basically Season 5's Thomas and the Rumors all over again. The engines are either jealous or afraid of Hugo because they think he's out to replace them. Really, guys? An army of diesel engines didn't replace steam engines? So what makes them think a rail zeppelin will? Although, to be fair, it was Steven who instigated them, but still. Another problem I have with it is Hugo himself. Like I said, I have no problems with the rail zeppelin being brought to Sodor, and I do like Hugo's design, as well as his German accent.
Hello, sir. My name is Hugo. I'm a rail zeppelin. My driver has been thinking you would like to see me. I'm powered by diesel, but my engine drives the propeller at the back.
But personality-wise, he feels weak. He's basically Hero 2.0 here, and this episode, as well as the next one, which we'll get to in a minute, kind of proves it here. Okay, baggage out of the way, there are some things I liked about it. The animation, as always, is top-notch. I could talk about how ARC has greatly improved since Season 17, but you kinda already knew that. Plus, there were some humorous bits, like Sir Topham's hat being blown onto a cow.
What was that? Where's my hat?
And the music, especially when Hugo arrives at Ulfstead Castle. Does that sound like the theme to 2001: A Space Odyssey to anyone else but me?
Great Scott!
Also, during the scene with the engines leaving Knapford for Ulfstead, the music sounds like a remix of James' Season 1 theme.
Improve the railway?
But I think there are some cars that need to be delivered to Ulfstead.
And I'm sure my passengers would like to visit.
Oh, and I'm coming too!
Positives aside, this episode was pretty average. I'd give it a 4 out of 10. It could have been better.
There are a number of reasons I despise this episode. Number 1, Hugo himself in terms of personality, like Mike mentioned. However, I'm not a huge fan of Hugo's bases. It just feels too out there, even for Sodor, not to mention the serious levels of danger involving his propeller. Now, I'm all for unique engine designs, but please, at least get him something to do while they're here. What exactly is Hugo's purpose anyway? To be a plot device to drive the story? Number 2, you probably knew this, but the entire C team are straight up jerks to Hugo. Even Edward is unlikable here, much like in Harvey to the Rescue, but was minor.
He doesn't even look like an engine, said Edward.
And Edward strikes out.
I don't need your help, sniffed Edward. Newfangled nonsense.
I don't care if he also expressed worry about being replaced. That is something he should have outgrown from the days of Edward and Gordon, and he's seen engines that are more modern than Hugo supposedly is. Again, why should any engine worry about being replaced now, of all times? Number 5. Number 3. Remember the truth about Toby? This episode doesn't. The season 19 episode actually gave credence to the jumping to conclusions shtick when Thomas saw Toby being lifted by Reg and thought Toby was going to be scrapped then. Once again, it doesn't excuse why the steam engines are hostile toward Hugo. Number 9. For that ending. Not only is it patronizing and a complete slap to the face, it comes from literally nowhere. It wants you to feel sorry for Hugo, which, spoilers, isn't going to happen, especially after the next episode he's in. which we'll get to. It takes morbid pity to be convinced the person you antagonize isn't that bad, and considering what I've reviewed in the past, yeah. I did not like Engine to the Future one bit. Even the pauses were not enough to salvage it for me, with characters being either unlikable or forgettable, and the moral being executed poorly, and in the future gets no points out of 10 for me. Yet another of Andrew Brenner's worst episodes. That actually are scored out to 2 out of 10. Not a good start for the DVD. And Hugo's other episode isn't much better. Race yourselves, people.
Hugo and the Airship.
The engines see a Zeppelin in the sky and think it's Hugo, but the Rail Zeppelin says he can only travel by rail. Skiff tells him that he can travel on rail and on water, and tells Hugo that he can fly if he puts his mind to it. So Hugo tries taking off Gordon's Hill multiple times, but ends up failing every time, much to his disappointment. Sir Topham Hatt and Thomas tell Hugo that he was not designed to fly, but his speed and propeller make him very special. Oh god, this is gonna be a long video.
Yeah, no kidding. Not 30 seconds into the episode is there a problem. Hugo is introduced again, despite that we just met him in the previous episode. Were they trying to make Hugo's introduction a half-steam two-parter, despite being 20 minutes apart on the DVD? I just don't get it.
Hugo's the fastest engine in the world.
I wonder how Spencer would have reacted to that. Can I have said on that instead? There's another problem with the episode that really drags it down. The plot is very disjointed. For the first half of the episode, the engines think that Hugo can actually fly, but then there's a second half where Hugo tries to fly. Whilst the latter proportion is resolved, the former is kind of, well, forgotten about. Also, how could the engines think that Hugo was the Air Zeppelin? The Air Zeppelin is shaped like a football, and Hugo is shaped like a sausage. It should be stated that no dirty jokes were told in the writing of this review. So for the engines to confuse the two, despite the obvious difference in shape, just makes them look stupid. Then there's the second half of the episode, where Hugo tries to fly. Perhaps the biggest issue I have with it is the moral. Yes, being yourself is a good lesson to teach, I'll give the episode some credit, but my main issue here, it's being taught way too often alone in the past year. In fact, it's the same issue the Great Race comes across. The fact it's a pointless, convoluted note-for-note retreading of Dream On, which did it better, doesn't really do that special any favors. I know this show is meant for kids, but come on! Can we stop with morals like that being retreaded over and over again? If you want this type of plot done right, try Best Engine Ever. But as for Hugo and the Airship, and as for what I liked, which was very little to begin with, Skiff is pretty good in terms of personality, and his lines fit his character nicely. While Secret Trying to Fly is rather dumb, the music for the montage is one of Chris Renshaw's best. Overall, I wouldn't go far to say it's worse than Engine of the Future. It's just as bad as it is.
Hugo tried again. And again.
Once again, Hugo feels like a clone of Hero. The first half makes the engines look stupid, and the BSF moral is hammered down your throat during the second half. It's lucky that there's an actually funny gag of Skiff, and the montage is pretty good, or at least the music is. Otherwise, my resentment would be deeper than it is, so 1 out of 10, I suppose.
Finally started to go down. Oh.
I really don't have that much else to add to what Zack said. If I can describe this episode in one word, it'd be this.
Boring.
I mean, my god, this is damn near Cardinal Engine's level of boring. The only difference was this wasn't nearly as tedious to sit through as that extended episode. Sure, like Zack said, there were some good things about it, like Skiff's role, music and whatnot, but for the most part, this was just tiring. As for the moral about being yourself, I'm sick of it now. It's been done to death. And yes, I know it's a show meant for young children, but I'm sure even they are sick of it by this point. And another thing, you're off the hook the way she does it. You and the Airship is now my least favorite episode this season, ranking at 0.5 out of 10. And with that, the combined score of this episode is averaged to a 0.75 out of 10.
Wow, we're really not off to a good start, are we?
No, we're not. Come on, next episode. Please be decent at least.
Actually, I think you may like this one more.
The Missing Breakdown Train.
Judy and Jerome, the original breakdown train, have not been involved with rescues lately since Rocky's arrival. Ryan takes him to Arlsburg Harbor, but the following day, Oliver takes him to a field and Duck to the Blue Mountain Quarry. During all this, Daisy has a derailment, so Ryan goes out to find Judy and Jerome. After the rescue, they're assigned to the western side of Sodor, whilst Rocky tackles the eastern side. So, Mike, is this the kind of episode you were hoping for?
Well, Zack, since the adventure begins, I wanted to know what happened to the updated breakdown train, as well as Glenn the coffee pot engine. And since we found out about Glenn in the Christmas coffee pot, I wonder what would happen to Judy and Jerome as well. I'd like to thank this episode for answering my question. This episode is great. I love the two cranes reacting to everything they see, from the sea of Arlsburg Harbor, to the countryside of the branch line, to the noisy atmosphere of the Blue Mountain Quarry. And I loved Ryan's role in this. Since Legend of Lost Treasure, he instantly became one of my favorite characters in the show. There is one niggle I have though. Nothing to do with the episode itself, but between Rocky's arrival in Season 10 and this episode, how was Rocky able to manage all the accidents on Sodor? I mean, Sodor is apparently a bigger island than we think. It would have been impossible for Rocky to clear up so many accidents on that island during that time, especially when said accidents happen more often than not. All the same, I'm really impressed with this episode. It seems as though Davy Moore seems to have improved after the mediocre Borefest that was the way she does it. I'd even go as far as to say this was my favorite of the bunch. In my opinion, the Missing Breakdown Train deserves to not be missed, and it gets a solid rating of 10 out of 10.
Before I give my thoughts on the episode proper, here's something I felt after watching it for the first time. Ryan and Daisy, the way she does it, the railcar and the coaches, and this episode all felt, in a way, like a Railway Series book. More or less, they feature the same characters, at least one in the same locations, and they're all written by Davy Moore. In the first story, we expand on Ryan's character from Lost Treasure, and we get some insight into his dynamic with Daisy. Then, in the following story, we have Daisy displaying another of her quirks, her obsessive compulsiveness, as well as her imagination running away with her. For story number 3, we know about where she used to work, Thomas's branch line, and we have her play off against Annie Clarabelle, a reference to her debut episode. And then there's this episode where the Horror crew gets 2 new additions out of Judy and Jerome, and this spiritual book goes full circle by having Ryan as a supporting character. Okay, on to the episode itself. Prior to this, I figured that the characters introduced in The Adventure Begins weren't going to be featured in the actual show, as they were most likely scrapped. But then with the announcement of Glenn's presence in the Christmas coffee pot and Over the Hill, I thought, oh well, maybe Judy and Jerome will get an episode 2. And they did. This episode also answered what has been bugging fans since Too Many Fire Engines aired a few years ago. In it, there is explanation that Sodor needed both Belle and Flynn in case 2 fires occurred at different locations, a point made clear at the end of the episode. In the Missing Breakdown Train, Thomas couldn't find Judy and Jerome and was about to get Rocky before Ryan decided to find the original cranes himself. And because of that, Sir Topham decided to relocate Judy and Jerome to the western region of Sodor, assigning Rocky to the eastern region, and like Mike said, it is confusing that Rocky would handle every episode himself for a decade, give or take. Whilst it may have vibes from said season 17 episode, the Missing Breakdown Train is actually a whole new story on its own. It contains some interesting visuals like Judy and Jerome's initial impression of Arlsburg Harbor, and the humor is fantastic. I mean, can you believe they actually got away with toilet humor in a Thomas episode?
I don't think I like seagulls.
I too give this episode a 10 out of 10.
So the third episode in, we've got an episode where our scores line up.
Yeah, that certainly made me forget about those episodes about the something that looks like the thing. What could possibly go wrong now?
3 steam engines, Gruff.
Let's just get this over with.
While traveling along his branch line, Thomas notices a broken fence at Farmer McColl's farm. That night, during Percy's mail run, the little green engine hears a strange moaning sound under the bridge. He tells Thomas and Toby about it, and they were convinced that it was a troll. No, not that type of troll. Anyway, when Thomas crosses the bridge again, he discovers that it was only one of Farmer McColl's cows making that noise. Well, Zack, since you seem to hate this episode more than I do, why not lay the chips down on the table and give your rant on this episode?
Alright, people. Prepare yourselves for an infamous Railfan Brony rant, because this is a huge one. I'm going to say right here and then that Free Steam Engine's Gruff is not only the worst episode of Season 20, it's also the worst episode of the entire Brenner era. Yeah, worse than last season's Other Side of the Mountain and Rocky Rescue put together. Why? It completely destroys Percy's character development from Tale of the Brave in seasons 18 and 19, and Toby reverts back to being the coward he was pre-signals crossed. Hell, it's made blatant in the first minute when Toby freaks out over trees being spooky without leaves.
But they are! Sometimes they look like big hands reaching over the tracks to grab you and pick you up like a toy train.
Not only that, the episode's a complete retelling of Tale of the Brave, and even go as far as rehashing elements from it. Why would anyone even think of doing a 180 on a character so to teach them a lesson they already know by now? That's one of the biggest mistakes anybody could do in story writing.
You could do anything if you put your mind to it. Just be who you are. I am being me, Thomas. And
No, Percy, you're way more than this. On top of that, there's the star-billing blue best, being Thomas, being portrayed as a perfect know-it-all. Just why did it make him the fur-billy goat, the one who confronts the troll? That role could easily have gone to Toby, the supposed-to-be voice of reason on the Farquhar branch line, who actually ends up being the first Billy Goat because the script demanded for Thomas being a boringly generic preschool role model without any flaws whatsoever. I'm actually getting angrier as I record this. Henry freaking out when a couple of leaves blow into his eyes. Come the puff on! We saw him portrayed brilliantly this season with Henry Gets the Express. Now he's back to being wimpy again. Seriously, Brenner, treating characters like that is not funny in any capacity. Free Steam Engine's Gruff is stupid from beginning to end. A plot told in the most predictable, boring way possible. The characters are written terribly. And this all came from the same guy who wrote All the Reliable Edward, Thomas's Shortcut, Bill or Ben, Thomas the Quarry Engine, and Best Engine Ever. This episode gets a -3 out of 10, if a score like that is even possible. I could rant endlessly to how much this episode fails and how Brenner lost his mojo in the past year alone, but I'll just leave it at that and let Mike share his thoughts.
Well, let me just say that I don't have as much distaste for this episode as Zack does. It's not the worst episode in the Brenner era, in my opinion. That honorable distinction goes to The Other Side of the Mountain, for the record. But, yeah, it's still pretty bad. Not that I'm saying this episode didn't have potential. Had they not used Thomas, Percy, and Toby in favor of other characters, particularly some of whom we haven't seen much of this season, this wouldn't have been so bad. I will say one thing that stood out, at least in my eyes, in this episode was Trevor's role. I'm not one of those people who think classic characters save bad episodes, but I am glad that Trevor is still being utilized in this series again, if only for a few seconds. Really, I think the only thing that held this episode back from being good was the incorporation of the Steam Team members. I think back to what the Reverend Audrey said in the Thomas the Tank Engine Man documentary regarding the TV writers and producers.
They're so obsessed with the popularity of Thomas that they have what I can only call crane-shunted Thomas to all sorts of unlikely places in order to get him into or force him into a particular story. whether the story was written with Thomas in mind or not.
And that statement is just as true now as it was back then. I mean, there are countless engines and other vehicles on Sodor who need attention, and the writers and producers seem to be pushing them aside in favor of the main 8.
I'm not going anywhere.
Look, I'm not saying I hate this episode, I'm just saying I feel it had wasted potential. Overall, I give it a 3 out of 10. I cannot give it any more than that. And our combined score leads to...
Nothing! Absolutely nothing!
Okay, I'm back. And you're done, right?
Yep, we're good. Saved you a whole lot of trouble. You don't have to see any more of that episode now.
Oh, thanks, Celestia. What the fuck?
I just don't know what went wrong.
So, Zach, next episode?
Henry in the dark.
Thank goodness for this one. Henry goes to the steamworks for a repaint, but when night falls, his paint starts to glow, and the engine gets scared, thinking that he's a ghost. When Henry tries to explain after finding out, Gordon and James laugh and call him a scaredy engine, much to his annoyance. Karma strikes him in the tender when they get scared again, and it turns out Henry had been painted with glow-in-the-dark paint instead of regular paint.
I gotta be honest, since Season 19's Henry Spots Trouble, I thought Henry was going to be a worrying, fearful coward from Season 9 onward, and he would be my least favorite Steam Team member because of this. But since Season 20's Henry Gets the Express, my reputation towards Henry was seen as much more positive this season, and this episode is no exception. For one thing, it's quite interesting to see an episode about glow-in-the-dark paint, as that is something that, to my knowledge at least, wasn't brought up on the show prior to this episode. And since the paint is in a luminescent green, having a green engine involved would be the natural choice to starring role. Speaking of Henry, I thought it was quite ironic that the other engines were scared of him, given the fact that, as I just stated, Henry would often be afraid of everything. And I mean everything. Here, the roles are reversed, as the other engines are afraid, and not Henry. Now, aside from the big green engine, we also got some good supporting roles from Victor and Kevin, Thomas, James, Gordon, the Brendan crew, and of course Sir Topham Hatt himself. It has been said before, but Keith Wickham is a genius at voicing our favorite controller, and this episode, as well as the next one, are no exception. Overall, Henry in the Dark is just brilliant, and I must say it's way better than... James in the Dark.
This lamp will make me look silly. Everyone at the concert will look their best except me.
Anyway, I give Henry in the Dark a 9 out of 10. Not as spectacular as Henry Gets the Express, but still very good.
Well, Henry in the Dark is way better than other episodes I could mention, and if anybody even dares to mention the title of the episode that came before, I will attack you with a spoon. But I digress. Anyway, there's not a lot I can add really. For the writers this season, they each have their own individual style. Helen Farrell, who we'll get to in a bit, does what makes a slice of life with action, as well as providing great character moments. Davey Moore tends to be a little out there when writing for the characters, and provides us with some good comedy. And then there's Andrew Brenner, who's, honestly, better off doing Railway series adaptations and maybe the odd special. Then there's Lee Pressman. He tends to go for the more gimmicky plots, like glow-in-the-dark paint. If I did have a problem with the episode, it was Edward feeling scared of the ghost. I know he barely turns up as a supporting character, but come on. They gave him great roles in Old Reliable Edward and The Adventure Begins, but can they at least give him a consistent personality? Same thing with Thomas, who constantly flip-flops between a generic preschool protagonist and a cheeky immature brat. Pick one personality and stick with it. Other than that, what more can I say? It's another solid episode from this season. I really like seeing Henry get all huffy when the engines tease him, and the gag with Sir Topham and the bucket was really funny. So with that glowing review, I too give it a 9 out of 10.
So we've had 2 solid episodes and 3 mediocre episodes. And there's only 1 episode left, so let's see how this one turns out.
Skiff and the Mermaid.
Skiff overhears Sir Topham Hatt talking about a mermaid and thinks that a real mermaid will be turning up. The following morning, when Sir Topham and his grandchildren arrive at the Maritime Museum, Skiff thinks he sees the mermaid and rolls away with Sir Topham on board. Both get stranded, and so Captain and Harold set out to rescue them. All the while, Sir Topham goes crazy before they're saved, and it turns out that Skiff's mermaid will actually be a figurehead for Captain Callus's pirate ship.
I really like Skiff from Legend of the Lost Treasure. At first he's naive and trusting Sailor John, but it was great how towards the end he actually stood up to the dastardly villain. Then there came Blown Away, where he really shone through in saving Duck and Oliver from crashing, and had a good dynamic with them. Now this episode comes around and we got to see his curiosity and excitement get the best of him. Although they don't contribute much to the story, the Great Western Trio were, pardon the pun, great in the roles they had, Duck in particular, and I like how the writers understand that there is more to him than just going on about the Great Western Railway.
There is only 2 ways to do things, Thomas. The Great Western Way and the wrong way.
Oh, and the Toad and the Whale reference was very nicely placed.
Once, Toad saw a whale stranded on the beach, and I didn't believe it, but it was true.
That's right, Mr. Skiff. It was.
I could probably say this from most of Season 20, but the human element in the storytelling was superb. I mean, we got to see a bit more of Captain Joe, Stephen, and Bridget, and the kids' reactions to their grandfather's supposed competence, or lack thereof if some episodes are to be considered, was such a nice little touch.
Oh, this could not get any worse.
And Sir Topham's escapades on sea? Good God, is that hilarious or what?
Go away!
And then we get to see the guy go nuts as he's supposedly stuck on a distant island and puts his hat on his rock friend. Oh dear. There wasn't really much I could say about the story really. It's just one about letting your imagination get the better of you. But it worked perfectly for Skiff's character, and we got an episode focused on the seas. All we need now is an episode in the air, and we'll have completed a set. Regardless if it's the finale or not, did this episode end the season on a high? Yeah, I'd say so. Like Missing Breakdown Train, I give Skiff and the Mermaid 10 out of 10.
Well, I don't have that much to add that Zack hasn't already said. The humor with Sir Topham Hatt was great. The Toad and the Whale reference was nice, and considering that's an episode Helen Farrell also wrote, it hardly surprises me. While it isn't Helen's best episode to date, it's still very good, and funny at times. I think I should also bring this up. Thomas does appear in this episode at the very end, but he doesn't say anything. And to my knowledge, he isn't mentioned by name either. In fact, this is one of 4 episodes this season in which Thomas did appear but didn't say anything. He cameoed in Ryan and Daisy and Blown Away, and he was mentioned in Over the Hill. That's it. Also, Sir Topham was a scout boy when he was a lad. That's interesting. So yeah, I don't have too much to say that hasn't already been said. It's just really good. It gets a 9.5 out of 10 for me, which leads to a combined score of 9.75 out of 10.
Now that we've covered all 6 episodes, let's see how I rank them individually from best to worst.
As well as our combined scores.
Overall, the episodes are a mix of good and bad. Coincidentally, our respected bottom 3s consist of Brenner scripts in the DVD, while our respected top 3s feature scripts not written by Brenner. Purely unintentional, I admit, but what are we saying here?
Anyway, I hope you enjoyed our reviews on the Extraordinary Engines episodes, which only half of them were extraordinary, sadly.
Well, here's looking forward to what Season 21 has to offer. Rose will be returning this season and getting a bigger role in the newer series. There will be some new characters, including Hannah the coach, who will take over for Henrietta in an episode, temporarily mind you, so that should be interesting. I personally look forward to Emily in the Middle if it's in this season, and hopefully Helen Farrell will be writing some episodes this season.
Actually, Zach, I found out from my friend Michael S., shout out to him, that Helen will not be writing any episodes this season, but she might return in Season 22.
Oh, that's a shame. Anyway, if you like this first edition of the Emotions Corner and would like to see more in the future, be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more from me, be sure to click that subscribe button if you haven't already. And I'd like to thank you, Mike, for joining me with these reviews.
Glad to have helped, Zach. Anyway, until next time, this is Mike Nicholson, aka Shining Lunar Productions, and the fun has been doubled.
And I'm Zack Wanzer, the Railfan Brony, and I hope to see you all again in the very near future. Peace and love.